We are in Champions League, man.
That was my next
Dilly din, dilly dong, come on.
Encara Messi, 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 gol, 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 gol.
Into Sheringham, and Solskjaer has won it.
I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
This is the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast with Gary Curneen.
Hello, welcome to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. My name is Gary Curneen. Joining me for this episode is Dr. Jonathan Fader. He is a sport and clinical psychologist with 11 years experience, been with teams like the New York Giants, the New York Mets. He's just released a new book called Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, Motivational Interviewing in Sports. So motivation is an area that I've really gone back and forth with over the last 10 years. I wanted to use Dr. Fader's experience and his expertise to shine some light on the dynamics specifically in our game at the minute. In particular, areas that impact motivation on a day-to-day basis like pay-to-play system, college scholarships, playing time, parents, loss of motivation. How do we deal with these and get a better grasp of them on the front end of things to work through them? So a lot of this is from areas that I've personally struggled with. So really looking forward to it. As always, we'd love to know your thoughts at Gary Curneen on Instagram, at Gary Curneen on Twitter. One quick announcement before we start. November's Modern Soccer Coach webinar will be on Wednesday, November 20th. And the topic will be set pieces. So something that I've never touched on in any of the books that I've written and I've never claimed to be an expert in. But over the past couple of years, I've worked alongside coaches with some great ideas on set pieces and some very good processes. So I wanted to bring on some special guests to discuss attacking set pieces, defensive set pieces, how do we train them, how do we scout them, zonal versus man marking, and a lot more. So the webinar will be on November 20th. The webinar will be free to all members of the Modern Soccer Coach community platform. If you haven't checked it out, you will get access to all the content on there, a range of webinars already uploaded, 250 plus exercises along with weekly content that's growing and growing. So go online, take a look, modernsoccercoach.com/community for a free 2-week trial, and then it's only $6 a month. So for the price of coffee, you get the webinars, you get the content, and you get the database of all the information that's going to continue to grow and grow. So excited about that. Okay, confidence with Dr. Fader. Here we go. Enjoy. Dr. Fader, thank you so much for joining me this morning on the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. Really excited to have you on.
I'm totally pumped, Gary. You do a great podcast, and I think so the things that we talk about are going to fit really well into the coaches that you talk to.
I think so. I just told you before we started recording that motivation is something that I've gone back and forth with in my journey as a coach. So I'm going to challenge a few things for myself today and look to improve and look to get a little bit better. But
this will definitely not be the first time I've been challenged in sports. I think, that's what this is all about, right? It's such a challenge for coaches, for athletes. We're all challenged, and we're all challenging each other. I mean, it's really literally the best way to challenge yourself is to be involved in sports, I think.
Okay, your new book that's coming out, Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, the Motivational Interviewing in Sports. It was the first time that I've heard about this term, motivational interviewing. So can you please give us a little insight as to what it is and the background behind it?
First of all, it excites me so much when people say that's the first time that they're hearing about it, because this is actually a technique that's been around a ton in other areas. And by other areas, I mean law enforcement, healthcare, and other areas where it's difficult to change. And motivational interviewing is a technique that actually started with addictions. What was found in addictions with people who had addictions problems is that a lot of times you would suggest something to someone or suggest that they change their behavior, for example, with smoking or drinking or other drug use, and they just wouldn't, even though it was the best thing for them, even though it was something that was clear they needed to do. And what we found in years of research and study, I'm talking about since the late 70s, is that a different way of having that conversation was really effective. traditionally what was done was to tell people, this is what you need to do. And if people were ambivalent, meaning they felt two ways about it, they were confused about what to do, or they had some objection, they tended to not follow the advice or direction. And so the whole art of applying this evidence-based, this science-based way of talking to people is about saying, hey, wait a second, there's overlap between this and, for example, law enforcement. There's overlap between this and other aspects of healthcare, et cetera. And you know what? There's actually aspects that overlap with things like personal training and physical therapy and now sports, in the sense that a lot of athletes who are, teenagers, younger, and certainly older, because this is applied in professional sports as well, are unsure how and if they want to change. And also, sometimes will listen to feedback, instruction, and for some reason not fully do what the coach has asked. And so this is an approach that helps coaches to work with athletes on all different levels, all different states of motivation, to help them to really embrace the message that's going to help them function better on the field or on the court and off.
It wouldn't be the first time that soccer or coaching is behind the rest of the world when it comes to finding something out that was really, really effective in psychology or motivation. Do you think the reason for that is because this traditional view of the coach, the any given Sunday, the coach having the key to motivation? Do you think that's what's held us back or is holding us back?
Gary, that's a great question. And the why, in other words, why coaches don't know about this or haven't been using this method. A lot of times what I think happens for coaches too, and what we do, and I put myself in this category too, is that we let our ego get in the way. And what I mean by that is that, it's so important for us to be effective. It's so important for us to win, to show that we're an excellent coach, and to show parents or fans or whoever it is that, that leaks into our mentality. And so really what happens is that we start to get less open to other things. And there are two reasons for that. One is, well, if it's not my way, I'm gonna be perceived as weak for not trying it. And two, I'm actually really suspicious of new ways because they may actually hurt my performance if I try them. And so I think that's some of the reasons that coaches don't have a beginner's mind towards things. I think the other reason is, a lot of times coaches are the authority, and anything that asks them to step out of their authority role can be challenging.
I listened to an interview that you did where you talked about the problem with, when you're presented with this vision or imperfect world in front of you with motivation, that you act as a fixer. Is that the same type of thing then whenever a coach is, basically we're taught in coach education that, you see something tactically, you step in, you stop the session, you fix it. You have a player with issues in front of you. By stepping in and fix it, then are you then causing a different set of problems? Are you then almost becoming ineffective with your coaching? Or how much is too much, I suppose I'm going to ask you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, this whole idea of the fixer, Gary, because in general, one of the ways to explain how motivational interviewing works in sports is that most coaches have one speed, right? Like think of yourself as a coach as a bike. Most coaches have kind of one speed, and that one speed is fixing. And what that means is to say, I'm a coach, and what I do is I instruct and tell players and athletes what they can do to improve, and when they're not doing that thing, I correct them. And I can do that in a nice and kind way. It's not like I have to, yell. I can do that in a nice way, but I see my role as being a fixer. I fix. And certainly I would think that's actually, in my mind, that's one of the predominant roles of being a coach. You have knowledge that the athlete or the player doesn't have, and you're going to impart that knowledge. That's a huge part of what being a coach is. But for motivational interviewing, we recognize there's two other speeds that you can ride on your bike in as you're coaching, right? The other speeds or the other ways of being are what we call following and guiding. So for example, what we believe that it's really important to learn how to do well and do better is to follow. And what that means is to listen well. Now, most people, when they think of listening, they think of keeping your mouth shut. But that's not what we mean by listening. What we mean by listening is learning ways to improve your ability to hear at a deep level what the athlete is actually saying, and to do things like use reflective statements, show them, everybody talks in sports about empathy, learning how to empathize and to make statements that show you understand what's going on for them. We find that in time that helps people actually connect better to their coaches and actually listen to them in a more deep way when they are trying to fix. And the other aspect, which in my mind is actually one of the truest forms of actual coaching, is called guiding. And what guiding involves is learning how to ask important and connected questions to the athlete about what makes them tick. We think that motivation comes from within, not from without. And the best way to motivate an athlete or a team is to find out what their motivation is. Right? I often talk about coaching. To me, the best coaching happens when a player takes what you have to say and brings it onto the field. I often see that coaches yell at players while they're on the field. Once you have to do that, I think actually it's a sign that we're not that effective in our coaching because we have to remind them of what we said. And so this technique employs these two other speeds of guiding and following to make it more likely that the player, the person you're working with, is going to actually take your advice and internalize it, bring it really inside them, and take it on the field. Take your voice with them on the field.
You've said that a couple of times. Is basically what your solutions are as coaches. Sometimes the player will move away from doing what is right for one reason or another. So the way you present that is of utmost importance. But the problem a lot of coaches have is that, they do present it in an aggressive, yelling way because of the emotion of the game, and all of a sudden it just goes south. But how important is it? Because the thing that stood out for me in your TED Talk was the level of humor you use, and then in your podcast that I listened to as well. Like, humor is obviously, for me, it looks like a way for you to connect with people, and it's very, very effective. But how important is it for you to use different facilities as a coach, like to almost stir that emotion in the person to buy into that vision or to buy into that inspiration that you're trying to deliver?
I mean, I think it's critical. It's absolutely critical. And the reason that I think it's critical is that the biggest factor that makes a team work or a coaching relationship work is trust, to me, right? The biggest thing that produces a high quality team, and I'm not just talking about athletes, I'm talking about in the military, I'm talking about in government. Trust is what lets people be at their best. And the reason that is, Gary, is because if I trust you, Gary, number one, I'm likely to put my best out there. Number two, I'm not expending energy worrying about if you have my back. So I can really perform at my best because I don't have to worry, am I safe here? And so underlying that trust is what we call psychological safety. I feel that you're going to have my back. You're going to be there for me when it really counts. And it's hard to develop, but things like humor and things like being who you are truly, and vulnerability, and telling people your story, those are things that allow people's walls to come down and for them to really begin to trust you. And in a lot of ways, motivational interviewing gives people a language for how to do that. So getting back to humor, which is what you asked about, I was once watching a professional coach give a speech before like a really important game. And what he did was he dressed up actually in the uniform of the opposing team and did an impersonation of like one of the important players on the other side of the team. And this was like at a super tense moment. And immediately, like, the entire team started off laughing. And then that allowed him to then get to a point once people were connected and laughing and feeling like this is hilarious, that sort of the energy changed in the room. And it allowed him then, once he engaged people, to be able to make certain kind of asks of people. And so when we think about going back to fixing, following, and guiding, it's not that you never fix, it's that like the connection and the engagement that you may use using motivational interviewing, or, one way to think of it is to use your words, humor. allows you to make certain asks or make certain points. So, my goal for the TED Talk that you're talking about was to really engage people and show them, look, like I like you, I'm challenged in the same way, and do it in a humorous way. And then I could say, I can make a call to action. It's in essence, in that talk, it was about, talking about vulnerability and how we all have it, but it's also talking about that, look, everybody should be doing mental preparation. It shouldn't just be elite athletes. We all should work on it.
Finding players' internal motivation. So asking these questions, we struggle as a coach, especially in soccer. You have a squad usually of 24, 25 players. I think we fall under the trap of going with the collective and looking as motivation as, is the team motivated? We've lost their motivation, etc., etc. How important is it for coaches to connect or find each player's individual motivation?
It's so important, Gary. Oftentimes, the way I put it to coaches when I'm doing a workshop or when I'm talking to them is, we often have three parts to thinking about accomplishing a goal when coaching. Many coaches are actually operating in a way where they're talking about what they want accomplished, right? So give me an example for a soccer situation about what you might want an athlete to do.
To execute a role, a defensive role at maximum effort for 90 minutes.
Okay. I want you to execute. I want you to be playing this defensive role on the pitch, and I want you to do that full maximum effort for the whole 90 minutes. Okay, so that's what we call a what. Mm-hmm. That's a what goal, and that's typically a fixing thing you'd say to an athlete. And I'm sure many coaches who are listening to us talking are thinking, okay, yeah, that's something I've asked people to do, or something like it. Now let's drop it down one level further and say, okay, what if you were a coach and you were going to tell them how you wanted them to do that?
There would be an X's and O's element to it. There would be,
right.
If it's a defensive player, then if it's against the opposition number 9, whenever the number 9 checks forward to the ball and they're in possession, then you're getting tight, you're stopping them from turning.
Right. And, I would add too, like from a sports psychology perspective, the things I would talk to them about, okay, how are you going to redirect yourself in 90 minutes if you get distracted? What will you do if if there's a goal? How will you reset? Right? So you're giving them that mental perspective as well. So you and I are talking about now hows, and a lot of times as coaches, we don't even get to the how. A lot of times we just stay on the what, right? We just say, look, I need you to be out there for 90 minutes doing this. And we don't really go to the how part of the conversation, actually, which is, what is the actual thing we need the athlete to do in spelling out? Sometimes I tell coaches, think about how you'd explain it if you were talking to an alien, right? At that level, start there, right? Explain it like step by step. But what's completely left off of the conversation, Gary, most of the time is the why. Meaning, why am I doing this? And not why am I doing this in a practical or technical sense, and obviously you're doing it so you can score and win a game, but why are you doing it? And so asking athletes things like, well, what did it feel like to do that? Like, what did it feel like to be playing for 90 minutes? When you are playing for 90 minutes, what's that like? What would it mean for you to get through this game and play 90 minutes at full effort? What if you only played 15% effort? What would that be like? How would your teammates react? What would it feel like if you were able to do that? What for you? What are the results when you play with maximum effort? So asking these type of questions really help an athlete to get to, as you were saying, that internal motivation, that why for themselves. And what science points to is that when someone's able to talk like that, in other words, answer those type of questions, they're much more likely to be open to advice from a coach or someone who's helping them, and be consistent with a particular change they're trying to enact.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. All right, here's where I struggle with it, because I've read Dr. Simon Sinek's work as well, Find Your Way, and working alongside teams. And what I struggle with in our soccer culture is that when you dig a little bit deeper and you find a way, a lot of it's parent-led, and a lot of it's led through mom and dad have basically invested X amount of thousands of dollars for the last 7 years in getting a scholarship, and now I've got that scholarship. I don't really enjoy the game. It's connected me with my family, and all of a sudden, you've uncovered something that maybe you didn't want to uncover. Is that a problem? What if you find out that the player is extrinsically motivated by, basically held hostage by either scholarship dollars or family wanting to do that? Because this is a problem I think that college coaches face, especially whenever the parent is suddenly not part of the picture anymore when they go to college.
Wow, man. I mean, I don't think you're the only person that struggles with that. I mean, that's a deep struggle from within semi-professional and like high-level youth soccer and other sports as well, having worked with many athletes in many sports. Oftentimes you'll uncover that the most motivated person is the parent. And there are several problems to that. So, what I would say to that is, I don't think it's a problem to uncover that. I think it's there all along, right? So when you figure that out, it's not that it was that you're the person's uncovering it for the first time. They're playing with that lack of internal motivation. So you're uncovering it for yourself as a coach, but that player knows that about themselves. One of the things that's been stunning to me is over the years working with many professional athletes in my practice in New York and with professional teams. I'm talking about MLS players, NHL players, MLB players, professional soccer players and other sports, is that many of those professional players would actually play a different sport if they could. So when you're talking to them, they would say, "Oh, I'd love to play, baseball." You're talking to a soccer player, they're like, "Oh my God, I wish I could play football," right? And so oftentimes we're not really, number one, we may be pushed into our parents, but we're also often not as good sometimes as the things that we really like. The way I look at it is, Gary, if you or another coach is uncovering that, it's not that the athlete doesn't know. They know that about themselves usually. And they're trying to cover it up for themselves. And so what you're doing is you're helping them to clarify what actually is important. If they really didn't want to be playing, they would probably have quit already. So there's probably something about the game that really speaks to them. It could be at this point something about the connection with their peers, right? That they have a tribe that they really connect to, and that becomes the motivation. It could be actually that there's a sense of self-esteem that they're about playing, that they feel good about it. It actually, in some cases, the motivation that we think is extrinsic actually is intrinsic, because there's an idea of legacy or about pride in their family, right? And so if they're doing it purely for the enjoyment of their parents, that's different than having like a deep connection and a commitment that they feel is important in their life. So figuring that out with an athlete and having that conversation, and as a coach, you may be the only person that can have a real conversation with that athlete about this. It may be that they actually can't even have that conversation with their teammates or their parents for different reasons. And I think that the most talented coaches are able to take that motivation and kind of help the player to rewrite it so it's consistent with playing, and it's also consistent with themselves.
Okay, so say it's a social connection with the team, and the player loves being part of the team, loves hanging out, and that's what draws them there every day. Say this is, for example, in the college setting. Are you then in danger? Because as a coach, as coach education, or where coach education soccer is going, is we're getting the what and the how. We're getting better at that. Like, we're getting armed with more information on how to get better technical, tactical coaches. And that's where we all really we all want to go on the training pitch. And that's what inspires most coaches that I've worked with. But when you have players then who you find out or uncover that basically, hey, I'm drawn to the social here. I have no interest in X's and O's or doing any of that there stuff. How do you manipulate or modify your environment where you don't lose control of, because you don't want to turn it into a fraternity or a sorority at the same time. You want to keep pushing and keep making people better. But I suppose, how do you work around and manipulate your situation to help both parties?
Well, I mean, the thing I think about, Gary, is what you're really saying at the heart of it is like, hey, we're here to play soccer, and we're here we don't want to lose this main motive or direction or mission. Like, this isn't really about, if you want to have friends, you can have friends in high school and in your other clubs, but this is really about playing soccer. And if we focus too much on the social element, we may lose that.
Yeah, I feel from personal experience, I feel like I have maybe lost one or two or three of 10 players by focusing too much on, the environment was too soccer based rather than I did not prioritize social settings, and I'm wondering how I should modify that there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first of all, going back to the beginning of our conversation, you are a kind of person and a kind of coach that I think, is at a high level, and I'll explain why. Because you're number one, you have what we call an emotional intelligence, self-awareness. Many coaches really actually lack self-awareness. We all lack self-awareness at some time. But the ability to recognize what's happening for you and what's happening in your environment is essential. So to be able to even ask oneself, hey, am I paying attention to the right thing here? Is a thing that many coaches don't do, actually, because they're so focused on the outcome. So I think even to start, just to say, for coaches that are listening, if you can even just ask yourself, like, hey, am I paying attention to the social element here? I think that's a great step. And that you know your environment better than anyone from the outside, so you're the best person to answer that question. I think, Gary, if to move on to your original question, I think if to me, it's the idea there is a social element in your team, and there's no way that you can kind of make it stop. Actually, most people are, as you're talking about, concentrate on developing it. And I actually think that, the best thing that you can do for a player or team is where you see that social element developing, to reinforce it. I think one of the strongest motivators to play hard and to win is doing it for your brothers or doing it for your sisters. One of the most interesting findings, I think, recently about teams and how they function is about looking at people who go to war. And, we would think, like, the first thing that you want to do is get out of that situation. Like, you're in a situation where your life's at risk, where, you're living under definitely suboptimal living conditions, and you're separated from your family. But what you find actually is that when those soldiers, oftentimes elite soldiers, come back from that situation, they often long for that battle. And the thing that they long for is not to hurt or kill other people or to have their life at risk. What they often long for is this sense of being connected to their brothers and sisters, this deep connection. And so I in my experience, playing for others can be more powerful than playing for yourself. And so developing the sense and even messaging that, even messaging being your brother's or your sister's keeper, and having that be a tagline or something that's talked about at team meetings, and supporting each other, et cetera. And also making time outside of the soccer activities for people to be together. Every elite team I've been on spends some kind of connected time together and has time to get to know each other as people. And so I actually think that can turn into a really big internal motivator if it's developed by coaches and encouraged.
So on that, how do you feel, again, from a, say, high school, club, college, this age group where obviously social is a big priority? I get a lot of emails from coaches that basically are, hey, I've got one or two problems, or the ship's going down kind of thing. A question I always get asked is, how much should I try to solve the problem in terms of making players, we're going to do this together, we're going to go bowling together, we're going to do this. Almost, you're almost the dad that's making the family hang out, and they want to get a break from each other. Whereas our environment here, like our team spirit in Chicago is unbelievable, but we have never done one official, team event together, So where's the sweet spot in facilitating that as a coach?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think, I'll say, like, I would never do anything that's unnatural, right? So, I mean, if your team is in the team that's going to have an official event, then I wouldn't do it. I just think that making time and that time actually could just be like setting things up. So there's sort of like a lag time between practices that people are just all hanging out in the locker room in a certain kind of way. That could be just like having meals together in a certain kind of way. But really just spending time getting to know each other, and making sure that that's somehow built in organically or naturally into the workouts, et cetera. I mean, the other thing I think about as you're talking about, Gary, is that it really, a lot of this, if the ship's already going down, it's hard to redirect that. A lot of this is more prophylactically, right? Like doing it ahead of time, right? So that if you get to the place where things are getting screwed up, it's really hard to right the ship. It's easier to have the ship sailing in the right direction from the beginning. And so what that means, I think, is creating an environment where, number one, people have the ability to share what's on their mind, and creating a green light for that. And number two, just creating an environment where people are spending time together from the beginning. I don't think it has to be really a formal situation. Now, I'll say one thing though about what I found is that when stuff is getting out of control, people tend to avoid it, or they tend to just only direct the problem bringer. I think of it as a problem bringer. It's like, a certain group, it could be a certain number of players, or it could be one person who's really kind of the person who's bringing the problem, but that doesn't mean that the problem is just with that people. It's usually larger in the team. And so what we do in motivational interviewing, and there's a section in the book on this, is thinking about how to hold a team meeting in which, we're not coming out and fixing the problem, but rather we're acting as a guide. We're trying to elicit what the problem is and trying to guide people to help resolve it on their own. And even players as young as 14, can really come up with excellent suggestions on their own in how to remedy a problem. And so being able to bring that out, I think it's just a tremendous learning experience for players. If the things are going down, to be able to have a coach that comes in and guides them using the type of questions that we suggest in motivational interviewing to help them resolve the issue on their own. So even starting a meeting with saying something like, look, this team is really important to me, and it's important to me. You guys are important to me beyond, whether we win or lose this next game. And so it's clear that there's some tension here. What's going on? So starting that with an open-ended question, rather than saying, this is, you guys need to behave in a particular kind of way. And then being strong enough and brave enough to be able to listen reflectively before we fix. What I think people get confused about, someone asked me recently, what's the biggest misconception about motivational interviewing, is that you can't fix. Of course you can fix. You always can come in with a hammer, right? Like you can always come in at the end of the day and say, look, this is what's going to happen. But we find that's more effective to start from a following and a guiding stance first, and see if you can work it through with the players so the players can suggest it. There's a famous quote by Abraham Maslow, said that, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Speaking of quotes, I wanted to run this one past you. So,
yeah.
Motivation versus commitment. So Brendan Rodgers, this is what he said: I first need them to understand the commitment of what it takes to work every day. I don't need players motivated, because some days you get up and you're not motivated. But if you're a life-saving surgeon, you work on commitment. If you do 5 operations a day and save people's lives, you might need to be motivated for the first 4, but the 5th guy needs you just like the first one. So you need to commit to your work. No matter how you feel, it's about being committed. Which, and I think as a coach, I think anything I tweet about commitment in players gets like 500 retweets or likes or whatever, because I think as coaches, we see that there as the player owns their commitment level, not us as a coach. If they're not committed, there's nothing I can do about it. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how to keep people motivated or keep them committed as the love of the game becomes a grind?
So great question. And I think someone like Brendan Rodgers is someone who I think is fiery with motivation. I actually have problems with the word motivation, and which is is a problem for me because my book has the title in it. But what I mean by that, Gary, is what are we really saying when we say motivation? And let me explain. So to go back to Roger's example, what I think about motivation, we talk about this in the book a lot, and we talk about this in motivational interviewing. With an athlete, motivation to me is kind of two things. It's importance and confidence. And often we get confused about why a player is not committed. So in their commitment, the two things they have to be committed, in my mind, are actually importance and confidence. This is important to me, right, is one part. And the other part is confidence, and I can do it. And where problems sometimes arise, right, is actually when there's an absence of one of those things. And where problems arise in coaching is where we're coaching to the wrong part of what may be missing. So if you have a player, there are certain players that it's so important to them to succeed, yet they lack the confidence or their ability. And we're telling them how important it is, but we're not helping them with their own sense of self-efficacy and their own belief in themselves. There are other players that actually think 100% that they can do it, but they actually, on some level, haven't found, as we talked about before, this internal reason or importance to do it. And we may not be coaching or asking the right questions to elicit that. And so I agree, commitment is 100% important. But what we're talking about in motivational interviewing is how we get there, focusing on the right thing at the right time with each player, meaning having the right kind of conversation using these following and guiding techniques to bring out either their importance or boost up their confidence.
I'm sure there's a lot of coaches doing what I'm doing right now, just nodding their heads and thinking of one or two players that are having issues. But I'm then thinking, that's my perception though. So, I mean, it's back to your point on awareness. What type of coach will always say, yeah, it's me getting that connection right, or helping them with that confidence, or how many coaches will then take the easy route and say, yeah, it's just not important enough to them, and then kind of wash their hands off with that player.
Yeah, I think listen, for me, let's go back to the initial question. You said, hey, man, I'm going to challenge you here. And I think you have. I think some of the questions you asked, Gary, have really challenged me to think about how to explain this in a way that every coach can really utilize some of these skills when they read this book. But look, to me, coaching is a challenge. And the biggest challenge, the biggest beauty of all this is working with those players. To me, like working with the players that you just go fix and tell them how to play, that's easy. That's easy. You can get a well-trained robot to do that. The beauty and the art of coaching is when things get hectic and hard, and players don't want to do things or are doing them. You're not sure why they're doing that. Like I say, embrace that beauty. You know what I mean? If I have a coach that's really difficult, and trust me, I have. Those are the ones that I find to be interesting and fun to work with. I mean, it's not that it's not a pain but but that's what really requires my best. I want to be challenged, and I think one of the things, if you're listening to this, and you're a coach, you can embrace that. You can say, yes, this is what I'm doing this for. I always tell people, if you're playing poker and you get pocket aces every time, the best hand possible in poker, it's going to start get boring. And so, same with coaching. If I'm telling you, people disagree with me, but I 100% believe if we won every single game and everything was easy, we wouldn't like sports, right? This is about the challenge of it. We want to be challenged. No one would want 15 easy games with easy opponents. We want to be challenged. And I think that's how you should look at these players, right? Is to say, look, if you're giving up on people, you're not challenging yourself to the best of the ability. You're saying like, okay, I don't want to raise my coaching to the next level.
We do tend to want things a little bit easy as a coaching community. I think that's a fact.
Yeah, I do too. Look, I mean, I'm not saying, look, I mean, when I have a difficult player, and believe me, I have, I mean, in fact, I would say a good portion, just because of the work I do, are players that are perceived as difficult or are having challenges, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I take that home at night, but what I wake up in the morning is I say, I'm grateful. I'm super grateful that I have these challenges, because I want a life that's interesting and stimulating and challenging. And so that helps me to change my outlook when I have that kind of conflict or that friction with someone. And what I would say to people, there's an American football coach, Urban Meyer, who has a quote that I really like about this, which is, "Don't get furious, get curious." Don't get furious, get curious. When you notice you're mad, see if you can transform that anger into a curiosity about what's actually happening for this person.
Brilliant. Yeah, I went to visit Dan Abrams a couple of years ago
Yeah,
in England.
of course. I like Dan a lot. I like his work that he's doing in soccer in the UK.
I went to visit him at Derby County and got there, and he took me for a coffee. And just as we walked in, two players walked into the cafeteria, one after the other. And the first one went in, he was all bubbly and, "Hey Dan, how's it going?" And he was high profile, and he was experienced, and he was captain of the club. And I was like, "Oh yeah." I said, "Dan, that's brilliant. Is he big into the sports psychology?" Dan was like, "No interest in it." And then the next one came in, it was the same thing. Sometimes as you think, from the lower levels, you think that as you go up, that these players automatically have this internal fire every day. But, most coaches at every level have the same problems, right?
Absolutely. We all have that. I mean, look, I mean, I've worked with 10-year-olds, and I've worked with elite players in Major League Soccer at every level, whether it's an elite player or players who are 10. Everybody has challenges in what they think is important and their level of confidence, certainly on a confidence level. I mean, one of the things about this is, like, I got to tell you, the players that I think that are not open to change are the ones that on a deep level have something they're struggling with. And so, to me, this is really about helping people to get over themselves a lot, whether it's, working on their mental game or losing weight to be in a different weight class. We all have these challenges in our own importance and confidence. And, if someone doesn't want to drop weight, it's either that they don't think it's important, or that they don't think that they could. And figuring out which it is and helping them through that's an art. And I believe motivational interviewing is one of the best brushes you can have to paint in that setting.
Last few for you. I want you to almost then turn the tables and challenge us as a community of coaches in soccer to look beyond the game for a couple of questions. So you've worked in your journey, you've worked with the fire department in New York City, and I'm fascinated by this. What does putting out fires have to do with motivational psychology?
That's a great question. Well, I think one of the things that I think about, I'm going to get really abstract here for a minute, just to answer that question. But, I actually think one of the challenges in life, forget about firefighting, is as we get as our world becomes increasingly industrialized and we rely on technology, a lot of times we have struggle with meaning. And the reason is that, in my mind, because we get farther away from our working with our hands. Most of us aren't actually creating a product with our hands. Some of us are carpenters or contractors, and we are. But most of us are actually, even coaching, right? Most of our work is done using words to convey meaning. And so I think that's challenging. And so I bring this back to your question about firefighting. The same is true in motivation. So if you're involved in activity that's about life or death, there's a high intrinsic motivation kind of built into what you do. So meaning with firefighters, I've found that most of them are super intrinsically motivated because they know that their role is to protect the public. And they know that if they actually mess up or they're not bringing their best, they're really going to put someone's life in jeopardy. And so I found that working with firefighters, they already have a really highly built-in sense of motivation. Now, that's not to say, though, that there are certain areas of training as a firefighter in which you feel less motivated. So, for example, what happens in firefighting, I'll give you an example, is that, you in firefighting, actually, New York is one of the biggest firefighting departments in the world. I think Tokyo is the only place where it's bigger. So New York has 11,000 firefighters, and it's the busiest place. But still, even in the busiest house, you're not going to a ton of fires, right? You might only go to 10 challenging fires a year. So many times you're leaving and you're going for like a cooking fire or something small, a smoke alarm or something like that, right? And so the challenge is to stay alert and ready every single time mentally. And so using techniques that help you to focus on what your internal motivation is and to do things like imagery and develop a pre-performance routine in mental conditioning, the same thing we would do with soccer, help you to stay locked in each time and keep that motivation present in some way. So if we take that step down and back into the world of soccer, a lot of people really don't know, as we talked about, why they're playing or even why they're coaching. What's the point of it? And I think, having your own mission statement, just like a firefighter has built in internally, can be revolutionary.
Going back to your TED Talk, at the start, you talked about basically being nervous when you're watching the games with teams you work with. And, you've worked with some phenomenal teams here, and teams like the New York Giants and the New York Mets. These are worldwide brands. So I can imagine that at that level, when you're watching games, there's most of the world are watching with you. From your role, what do you see as success whenever you're working alongside those teams and those players?
Wow. So, I mean, the main thing I think about in terms of my own personal success is, there's an acronym that we use in sports psychology called APE. And what that stands for is the things that we control in our performance. What's in control is A, our attitude, P, our preparation, and E, our effort. And so what I'm judging myself on in terms of every day in my role in working with an athlete or a team is, do I have the best attitude I possibly can? Meaning, and this goes back to what we just talked about, if I have a challenging player, am I saying, I don't want to deal with that? Or am I saying, look, this is going to make me better by doing it, and I'm so lucky to have this opportunity. And then preparation. Am I doing everything I possibly can to study who I'm dealing with? If I have a player who, like Dan was, like you talking about in the coffee shop, do I know exactly why they are resistant? And have I done everything to prepare to understand this particular person? Then effort. Am I giving up? So if a player is not interested, am I really putting in the effort? Am I allowing myself to shy away from figuring them out and figuring out what's getting in their way? So I really judge myself on those things. And I think I have an overarching goal, which is I'm actually really focused, on people first and athletes second. So, for me, success, yes, is having people win. But I ask myself, is this person coming away from our conversations with a better ability to enjoy their life as a whole and make a greater impact on the team and on and off the field on fans or people in general? And so that's sort of a overarching mission that I have is to incorporate those discussions into the conversation as well.
Whenever you're working with these teams, and again, one of your interviews, you said the importance of, you said top down and bottom up is the two areas that you really work with, and working with the resistance of, as coaching community and as coaches, sometimes we can become more ingrained in ineffective behaviors or ineffective thinking more than the players can. How can we challenge ourselves as coaches to take a little bit more, to challenge our own beliefs when we're not basically blessed with a staff of 20 people and people like yourselves coming in to challenge that?
I mean, listen, I've done a lot of podcasts. I can't believe how thoroughly you've looked into some of the concepts I've talked about. It's pretty astonishing. And listen, flattery will get you everywhere. So I appreciate it, but I think it's inspiring for your listeners that, talk about APE, right? This idea of attitude, preparation, and effort. It's clear to me that you have a deep level of preparation for these conversations, and I'm sure your listeners appreciate that. So challenging ourselves, and I think, this is, really one way to think about all of the things we talked about. I mean, I really like this theme that's emerged through our conversation about challenging. So top down and bottom up, that idea is about when you're working in an organization, and this can be an organization where you have 20 people, right? It could be you and a bunch of parents and some kids, or it can be Major League Soccer, or world class soccer. Like this, what we mean by that is that a lot of times when we're trying to incorporate change in an organization, we just work with the people in power. And that my belief, and this comes from work and actually mentorship I've had from Sandy Alderson, who is the GM of the Mets when I was there, is the idea also of that you want to do it, you want to reach every level. And so, both he and also Omar Minaya, who was another who was a GM there and is still with the Mets, both of them I think really helped me to think about program development and how you work with a system. And so what that means for you is, if you have a message you're trying to get across, hit the captains, but also hit the newest player on the team, right? Form a way of making sure that everybody is influenced by what you're trying to get across. And, I'll say about that in terms of, listeners here about challenging yourself. Look, I mean, it's really hard to get better without a coach in anything. And one of the issues is that coaches don't have coaches. So I'd recommend to anyone who's listening, get a coach. I mean, look, if you're in a situation where you can get a performance consultant or a sports psychologist, great. But you can actually just identify another coach. And it could be someone in a different place that you Skype with, that you can talk to about these issues. Hey, I've got this player. And really talk through. And the first step is to be more honest and vulnerable about what you're experiencing, because I guarantee you other people are experiencing it too. And if you can say, here's my real struggle with this, I feel like I'm not being effective here, or, I don't like it that I get mad and then I find myself unable to figure out a way to make it better with this player. You're going to find that other people have those challenges too. And that being able to talk that through with people and have people reflect through that with you is a great way to challenge yourself.
Brilliant. What a way to finish it. Dr. Fader, thank you so much.
Awesome. It's been a blast.
Thanks so much to Dr. Fader for his time and his insight there. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Yeah, motivation and commitment. Initially, as a college coach, I bought into the whole idea that it was all or nothing, that you had to get committed players and they had to be on board. And if they weren't, the culture was almost at risk or even sacrificed. And then in recent years, when it's come to working with players in Chicago, you get to find different personalities and what motivates different people. And there's so many different types of it. Some people, some top players, some of them are motivated by freedom of expression. Some of them are motivated by getting better as individuals. Some of them are motivated by winning. Some of them are motivated by competition, going in every day and just competing. Some of them, the motivation changes. It can shift. If they're younger, this can particularly happen. And it's only when you sit down then and you realise that if that's the top end of players, when you go back and almost reverse engineer player development, I think we've got to start understanding people and meeting them where they're at in terms of that motivation. Now that means that cultures cannot be what we want it to be. We want this all black culture, or we want the competitive cauldron culture in all our teams, and sometimes that's just not possible to grow right away. I think now, as a coach, you have to be agile in so many ways. You have to be agile, adaptable in your style of leadership, in your playing systems, in your training. But I think also then that has to extend to management, and that has to extend to different people and how you're connecting with them and how you are inspiring them or motivating them or whatever you want to call it. I mean, motivation is a form of communication. So what I really loved about that conversation is if you take out the word motivation and take out our bias associated with that word, which is, you know, the any given Sunday speech again, if you take that out and you replace motivation with communication, then all of a sudden I think you get a better grasp of buying into exactly what you need to do to improve it at every single level, youth, college, pro, whatever it is. And that goes down to the art of communication and impacting players on a daily basis. So something that I definitely want to get better at. I've been reading a lot in the business world over the past 12, 24 months and trying to bring certain principles onto my coaching. Things like motivational interviewing I've never come across before. So I'll be definitely grabbing a copy of the book and just trying to understand a little bit more where I stand and how I can impact and how I can influence as a coach and what role the environment has in changing motivation. I think if we can become a little bit more aware of that, if we can become a little bit more humble in the fact that we don't control motivation, and motivation in environment sometimes controls us as a coach, and we are more adaptable, more flexible, and maybe a bit more willing to try, maybe a bit more willing to reconnect with players who we initially think are really, really motivated, and all of a sudden they don't have that spark that they once had. Maybe reconnecting with those players and learning how to do that, I think, is very, very important. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and we'd love to hear your thoughts just on the topic as a whole, things that you do within your culture at whatever level it is to try and keep your players connected, keep them inspired, keep them learning, keep them growing, and keep them motivated to get better every day. So we'd love to hear that. At Gary Curneen on Instagram, at Gary Curneen on Twitter. You can reach out on email as well, gary@modernsoccercoach.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please, before you shoot off, please give it a 5-star rating on iTunes. Give it a little review as well. Always helps. Thank you so much. I will talk to you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. For more coaching topics, sessions, and resources, head on over to Coach Curneen on Facebook or visit the website at www.modernsoccercoach.com.